At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at WWII Airfield in New Guinea. He watched his pilot get ready for a mission that most likely wouldn't end well. The pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, was only 23. He had flown 6 combat missions and hadn't scored a single kill yet. That morning, the Japanese had sent 18 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters to meet the American patrol. Hayes was heading straight toward them. McKenna had been working on P-38’s for 8 months. He understood every bolt and cable on the airplane. Twin-engine, twin-boom fighter, fast in a straight line, incredible at high altitude. But it had one serious flaw that was costing American lives every day. It couldn't turn with a Zero. The Japanese Zero was lighter and far more agile. It could complete a level turn in about half the time a P-38 needed. In a close-range dogfight, that difference was deadly. American tactics were clear. P-38 pilots were told never to try turning with a Zero. Don't circle with them. Use speed, use altitude, attack fast, climb back up and get out. Hit, run, and never stay. Hayes had tried that advice 5 times. It hadn't worked. The Zero pilots were clever. They tricked Americans into turning, slipped inside the wider P-38 turn, got behind them, and shot them down. In 6 weeks, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38’s. Most were taken out after getting trapped in turns they couldn't escape. McKenna had seen too many young pilots die. Boys, really. They strapped into their P-38’s full of confidence, and then they came back in wooden boxes, or didn't return at all. The manuals blamed pilot mistakes. The instructors claimed the flyers weren't following the rules. But McKenna knew the truth. The real issue was in the airplane's control system. The aileron cables in the P-38 ran through the twin booms back to the tail, and then forward again to the wings. The system had a tiny amount of slack. Just a small bit, less than half an inch when the controls were fully moved. But that tiny slack meant there was a slight delay between moving the stick and the ailerons responding. At high speeds, it wasn't noticeable. But at low speeds, during hard turns, that moment of delay was enough to lose ground to a Zero, and enough to get a pilot killed. 2 months earlier, McKenna had brought this issue up with the engineering officer. The officer said the tension was within specs. The factory allowed that much slack. Fixing it would void the aircraft's warranty. And no field mechanic was allowed to adjust flight control systems anyway. Only Lockheed engineers could authorize that, and Lockheed was 7,000 miles away in California. So McKenna quietly broke the rules. He took a piece of piano wire from a damaged plane, trimmed it to about 6 inches, bent it into a Z-shape, and installed it as a makeshift tensioner on Hayes's left aileron cable. It took him 8 minutes. It added less than half a pound of tension. But it removed the slack completely. No one noticed. Inspectors were focused on engine oil and ammo belts, not cable tension. McKenna kept quiet and watched Hayes taxi out, take off, and head toward the Japanese fighters. What happened over the next 17 minutes would end up changing how P-38’s were flown across the Pacific. The first pilot McKenna ever lost to a Zero was Lieutenant David Chin on July 9, 1943. Chin had only been in the theater for 3 weeks. McKenna worked on his plane every morning. They talked about California, Chin from Sacramento, McKenna from Long Beach. Both had tinkered with cars before the war. That morning, Chin took off at 6:15 for a sweep. He returned 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes in the left boom, a story about a Zero that nearly outturned him. Chin said he tried rolling out and diving like the manual said, but the airplane didn't seem to react right away. It felt sluggish, as if the controls were late to respond. The Zero almost got him, and he survived only because his wingman shot the enemy off his tail. McKenna studied the bullet holes. They were tight and clean, perfect deflection shots. The Zero pilot had predicted exactly where Chin's plane would be. That shouldn't have happened if Chin's P-38 had rolled and dived instantly. Unless there had been a delay. Chin's plane went to the depot for repair. McKenna never saw him again. 3 weeks later, he heard Chin had been killed in another P-38 over Rabaul. Same situation, caught turning, couldn't roll out in time. The second pilot was Captain William Morrison. He was a seasoned flight leader with 11 kills. He understood every quirk of the P-38 and knew how to fly it safely. On August 3rd, his flight met 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. Morrison shot one on the first pass and came around for a second. 2 Zeros reversed and went after him. McKenna later heard the radio calls, Morrison trying to roll and escape, saying his controls felt weak or mushy. The Zeros stayed behind him through the whole maneuver and shot him down at 4,000 feet. His wingman said Morrison's plane didn't seem to respond fast enough, like he was wrestling the controls rather than flying them. Morrison's crew chief, Rodriguez from Texas, was one of McKenna's friends. Rodriguez was certain something mechanical had failed. He checked everything after the wreck was recovered: engine settings, control linkages, cable tension. Everything was within limits. Nothing officially wrong. The report blamed Morrison. Rodriguez never believed that. Neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had seen 17 pilots die. Some he knew well, others he'd only spoken to briefly while checking their aircraft. But he had worked on every one of their planes. McKenna had signed off their maintenance logs, had watched them taxi out and lift into the air. Some returned, some didn't. And the ones who made it back all complained about the same thing. The P-38 felt slow to react during tight maneuvers, like there was a tiny hesitation between moving the controls and the airplane actually responding. Most pilots assumed that was normal for a big twin-engine fighter. Heavy planes had heavy control surfaces. Some delay was expected. But McKenna knew better. He had felt that slack himself when working on the cables. That little bit of looseness was real. He even started paying attention to how the cables sounded when he checked tension. There was a certain tone, a low twang, when they were plucked. Loose ones sounded different from tight ones. Every P-38 on the line had that slightly loose sound. Still within limits, but definitely loose. One night after Morrison was killed, McKenna mentioned it to Rodriguez. Rodriguez asked what could be done. McKenna said, nothing officially, then added that there was an unofficial fix, but using it would break more than a few rules and could get them both court-martialed. The pilots weren't the issue. They understood the tactics. Every briefing said the same thing. Every trainer repeated it. Don't turn with a zero. Keep your speed. Stay high. Attack fast and pull away. But combat didn't care about doctrine. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea 2 months. Just 23, a farm boy from Iowa. 6 missions, 0 kills. Not because he lacked skill. He was doing exactly what he had been taught. But those rules kept leaving him with no firing opportunities. On his 3rd mission, he came down from altitude, built up to nearly 400 miles per hour, came out of the sun like the manual said. He lined up a 0, started pulling lead. The 0 rolled sharply left and dropped into a dive. Hayes tried to follow. His P-38 rolled, but it felt sluggish, like it was pushing through heavy air. By the time he pointed where he needed to, the 0 had vanished. Hayes climbed back up, frustrated, without firing a shot. The 4th mission went even worse. Hayes and his wingman bounced 2 Zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes fired the first burst and missed. The 0 snapped into a hard right. Hayes rolled to follow when his wingman shouted that 2 more enemy fighters were diving in from above. Hayes tried to roll level and dive out. The plane moved, but not quickly enough. One of the diving Zeros landed a short burst of 20mm shells into his right boom. They didn't break through, but they rattled him badly. He limped home, engine smoking. On his 5th mission, Hayes watched his wingman die. Lieutenant Thomas Parker, just 21, from Boston. They had trained together. On August 14th, during a dogfight near Finschhafen, Parker became separated from the group. 2 Zeros locked onto him. Parker tried everything he knew, hard rolls, reversals, scissors, but the Zeros matched him move for move. Hayes heard Parker calling over the radio, voice rising with fear. He said his plane wasn't turning fast enough. Then came gunfire, Parker's scream, and silence. Hayes barely slept that night. Neither did anyone else. Parker's bed stayed empty. His personal belongings were boxed up. His plane was marked off as a combat loss. The maintenance log said no mechanical problems. The official cause, pilot error. McKenna had inspected Parker's plane that morning. Everything had been perfect. The engine's time right. Control surfaces aligned. Cable tension within specs. The airplane was fine, yet Parker still died. And McKenna knew that slack in the controls, tiny as it was, had cost him his life, just like it had killed Morrison, Chen, and 14 others. The worst part was the smell. Every morning, as McKenna worked, the odor of fuel, heated metal, and hydraulic fluid filled the air. It was the smell of planes about to go into combat. Some of them would return. Others wouldn't. And McKenna would be standing there again the next morning, working on more aircraft, watching more pilots trust machines that couldn't quite react fast enough to save them. On the evening of August 16th, Hayes found McKenna in the maintenance area, working on his P-38. Hayes quietly asked if there was anything at all, that could make the plane roll faster. He didn't care if it was against the rules. He just wanted a fighting chance. McKenna looked at him and saw a young man who knew he was running out of time. McKenna told him to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. That night, McKenna worked alone. After 2,300 hours, the hangar grew quiet. Only the distant hum of generators and the constant buzz of insects broke the silence. The air was thick and humid. He removed the inspection panel from the left boom. The metal was still warm from the day. Inside, the aileron cable ran along its pulleys. McKenna grabbed it with both hands, felt the loose play, maybe 3/8 of an inch before tension caught. His hands were greasy, his fingers sore from the day's work, but he felt that slack clearly. It wasn't right. He pulled out a piece of piano wire he'd salvaged from a wrecked P-38 weeks earlier. He had kept it without knowing why. Now he understood. He sat on the floor, bit the wire into a Z shape using pliers. The wire was stubborn. It slipped twice, slicing his thumb the second time. Blood made it slick. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept going. After 8 minutes, the Z shape was right. It would act as a tensioner, adding just enough pull to remove the slack entirely. Installing it was the hard part. The space was tight. He had to work one-handed, holding a flashlight with the other. Shadows jumped across the interior. His shoulder pressed into the metal, cutting into his skin. Sweat rolled down his back. He unpinned the cable at the pulley, dropped the tiny clevis pin. It bounced somewhere deep inside the boom. He spent 5 minutes feeling blindly for it, heart pounding the whole time. If anyone caught him making unauthorized changes to flight controls, he'd face a court-martial and possibly prison. But Hayes was as good as dead without this fix. He finally found the pin, attached the wire tensioner, forced the pin through the tight fit, then pulled on the cable. No slack. The control surface moved instantly. Perfect. He closed the panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped away the blood, and walked out of the hangar at 1:15 a.m. The night was thick and quiet. Somewhere far off, he heard aircraft engines, probably Japanese raiders. The sound made his stomach twist. He had just broken a dozen rules, installed a non-standard part, and altered a critical control system. If the fix failed, Hayes could die, and so could McKenna's career. But if it worked, Hayes might live. McKenna lay in his bunk but didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling until dawn. At 6:30 a.m., he walked to the flight line, watched Hayes's plane get fueled and armed, watched Hayes go through his briefing and strap into the cockpit. At 7:42, Hayes took off. McKenna stood and watched the P-38 climb and joined 16 others. Then they headed northwest toward enemy territory. After that, there was nothing he could do but wait. The fight began at 8:14. Hayes's group intercepted 9 Zeros at 13,000 feet over one gulf. The sun was behind them, perfect for a diving attack. Hayes flew number 3 in the formation. The leader called the bounce. They rolled over. Hayes chose a 0 at the back. He dove from altitude, hit about 380 miles per hour. The 0 grew big in his gun sight. Hayes could see the rising sun emblem, even the pilot's head. He fired. Most rounds missed, but a few sparked off the wing. Not enough. The 0 rolled right and dropped. Hayes rolled after it. That's when he felt it. The airplane answered instantly. No pause. No lag. The stick moved, and the plane rolled the moment he touched it. Hayes had never felt his P-38 handle like that before. It was as if the plane had been waiting for him to move the controls, and the moment he did, it reacted instantly. He rolled almost 90 degrees in half the time he was used to. Dropped the nose. The 0 showed up right in his sights. He fired again, a 3-second burst. The bullets climbed along the Zero's body from the tail, straight up to the cockpit. The engine blew apart, pieces flying everywhere. The fighter flipped upside down and fell toward the jungle, throwing off a trail of black smoke. It was Hayes's first kill, but he couldn't celebrate. His wingmen warned him that more Zeros were diving from above. Hayes glanced up and saw 3 of them heading down toward him fast. They had watched him shoot down their partner, and now they were coming for payback. Hayes pushed the throttles forward and tried climbing, but the Zeros were picking up speed in their dive and would be on him within seconds. The only thing he could do was turn back and fight. Every instinct he had told him to keep climbing, to run. That was the official tactic. But following the book today would get him killed. He rolled hard left and pulled. The P-38 snapped around quicker than he had ever felt it move. As the nose came across the horizon, he caught sight of the lead Zero. It was starting to turn with him, but it clearly didn't expect Hayes to reverse that fast. The Zero was out of position and exposed. Hayes pulled ahead of its flight path and fired. He hit the left wing root. The wing folded, and the Zero spun away. 2 kills in half a minute. The remaining Zeros tried a scissor maneuver, switching directions back and forth to force him to overshoot. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they switched, his P-38 snapped into the turn instantly. No lag, no heavy feeling in the controls. The plane followed him the moment he thought about what to do next. It felt like flying a different machine, as if someone had taken away hidden weights he never knew were there. Then one of the Zeros messed up. It turned too sharply and lost too much speed. Hayes slipped inside its turn. He was only a couple hundred feet away. He fired. There's no way to miss. The Zero broke apart, pieces flying past the canopy. Hayes felt a shake as debris hit the right boom of his P-38. 3 kills. The last Zero ran. Hayes didn't chase. He was low on fuel and almost out of ammunition. He climbed, linked back up with what was left of his group, and they headed home. The whole fight had lasted 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at WWII at 0903, McKenna was waiting. Hayes cut the engines, climbed out, hands trembling, flight suit soaked with sweat. He walked straight to McKenna and said only 2 words. It worked. Neither of them knew that 6 other American pilots had watched the whole thing from high altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell, leading a flight in the 475th Fighter Group, saw Hayes's fight from 15,000 feet. He had been watching Hayes's section mix it up with the Zeros when he noticed something strange. Hayes's P-38 was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The way the plane snapped through its moves made it look like it weighed half as much as it should. Mitchell knew all the pilots in the area and what their skill levels were. Hayes was talented, but not that talented. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in debrief, still shaking with adrenaline while filling out his combat report. 3 kills confirmed. Mitchell asked him what was going on with his P-38. Hayes said he wasn't sure, just that the plane felt quicker, more responsive today. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything, and Hayes told him to ask Technical Sergeant McKenna. 2 hours later, Mitchell tracked down McKenna in the maintenance area. The sergeant was working on another Lightning, covered in grease and hydraulic fluid. Mitchell came straight out and asked what he had done to Hayes's plane. McKenna stared at him for a moment, then explained about the piano wire tensioner, the cable change, and the unofficial modification to the control system. Mitchell listened the whole time without saying a word. When McKenna finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same thing to his own aircraft. McKenna said he could, but warned him about the risks. The mod wasn't approved and hadn't been tested officially. If anything went wrong, both of them could be in serious trouble. Mitchell didn't care. He had lost 4 pilots in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't get out of. If anything might help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could come later. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38 with the same piano wire tensioner and installation method. Mitchell flew the next morning and came back amazed. He said the plane rolled like a rail fighter now instead of feeling heavy. His wingman overheard him and asked McKenna for the same upgrade. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 planes. Word moved through the squadron quickly. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs about the cable adjustment. Some crew chiefs refused, citing the rules. Others were willing to try. McKenna taught them how to do it. Cut a piece of piano wire, bend it into a Z shape, slide it into the cable as a tensioner. It took 8 minutes and completely changed the feel of the airplane. The modifications spread from pilot to pilot and mechanic to mechanic. Nothing written down, no official approval, just quiet conversations in the ready room and the maintenance tents. Hayes shot down 2 more Zeros on August 22nd using the modified controls. Mitchell got 3 kills on August 25th. More pilots started returning from missions with victories. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Lieutenant James Watkins, a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group at GUSAP, heard about the mod from a pilot transferring from WWII. Watkins didn't really believe it, but he tried it on one plane. The pilot came home from his next mission with his first kill after 2 months of flying. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft. Soon, other crew chiefs in the 49th were doing it too. By early September, around 40 P-38’s in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at WWII noticed something strange but couldn't figure out what was happening. Cable tension checked out on inspection days because the mechanics removed the wire before the checks and put it back in after. The pilots knew. The mechanics knew. The officers didn't. And the kill ratio began shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38’s for every Zero they shot down. In August, it had improved to about 1.3 to 1. By September, it was almost even. Something had changed, though no one in command officially knew what. Then the Japanese started noticing. Reports in late August mentioned that American P-38’s were rolling faster, turning harder, and reversing direction more quickly. Tactics that had worked for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most famous aces with 64 kills, fought a P-38 on September 3, 1943 over WWII. He used his usual tactic, trying to drag the American into a turning fight and then snap back inside the P-38's slower roll. Except this P-38 rolled faster than he expected. Sakai barely avoided hitting it head-on. The American got a firing angle, and Sakai had to dive away. He returned to his base confused and angry. Other veteran Japanese pilots reported the same thing. The Americans weren't flying differently, they were still using familiar tactics. But their planes were reacting faster, even if only by a small amount. That tiny improvement was enough to throw off the timing Japanese pilots relied on. Japanese intelligence tried to figure out what had changed. They looked at wrecked P-38’s and found nothing unusual. The planes looked identical to the ones from earlier months. Same engines, same guns, nothing visible to explain the difference. What they didn't realize was that the change was hidden inside the tail boom, a 6-inch piece of piano wire that blended in with normal equipment. Even if they found it, they probably wouldn't know what it was for. It wasn't a new weapon or engine, just a small tweak to the control cables. But that small tweak was costing them pilots. By mid-September, Japanese fighter losses to P-38’s climbed to levels they hadn't seen since early in the war. The psychological effect was huge. For 2 years, Zero pilots had been able to control turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was fading. Pilots who used to attack aggressively were now cautious, unsure whether their usual tactics still worked. The Japanese tried adjusting their approach. Some pilots avoided turning fights with P-38’s and used hit-and-run attacks instead. But that meant giving up their biggest advantage, maneuverability. Fighting the P-38 on straight-line terms made them easier targets because the P-38 was faster, sturdier, and carried more firepower. Others tried doubling down on aggression, getting closer before firing, and taking more risks. But aggression without the ability to outturn the opponent just led to quicker losses. Several skilled Japanese pilots died in September using tactics that had worked perfectly 2 months earlier. The core problem was simple. They were reacting to an advantage they couldn't see and didn't understand. You can't create tactics to fight an opponent whose upgrade is invisible. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters to P-38’s. American losses in the same period were 22. The ratio had flipped. For the first time in the Pacific, P-38’s were destroying Zeros at better than a 1-to-1 rate. Japanese commanders told their pilots not to engage P-38’s unless they had overwhelming numbers. That order was the moment everything shifted. The Zero went from being the predator to being the prey. And it all traced back to a small piece of piano wire that was never meant to be there. The modification was never officially approved while the war was still going. The Army Air Force's engineering branch only learned about it in October 1943, when an inspector at WWII noticed odd cable tension readings on several P-38’s. He tracked the issue to the wire tensioners, wrote a report, and sent it up the chain. The report stayed buried on desks for almost a month while officers debated what to do. The mod broke regulations, but it clearly worked. Squadrons that used it were getting better kill ratios, and their pilots were coming home. The argument wasn't about whether the change helped. The results were obvious. The real question was whether they should punish the mechanics for making an unauthorized change or quietly accept it because it saved lives. In November, Lockheed sent a team of engineers to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. They ran tests, measured loads on the cables, checked how the controls responded, and flew the aircraft themselves. Their findings were straightforward. The modification was safe, effective, and honestly should have been included in the design from the beginning. Lockheed added a similar system to the P-38J model, which started coming off the production line in December 1943. But McKenna never got official recognition. No award, no write-up, nothing. Lockheed's paperwork credited the improvement to engineering analysis, and McKenna's name didn't appear anywhere. Hayes made it through the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese planes, and went back to Iowa in 1945. He married his high school sweetheart, raised 4 kids, and worked as a crop duster for nearly 4 decades. He never forgot what McKenna had done for him. Every year on August 17th, he called McKenna just to say thank you. Mitchell survived too. He later became a squadron commander, fought through the Philippines, and ended the war with 16 kills. Afterward, he stayed in the Air Force and retired as a colonel in 1963. He told the piano wire story to every new maintenance officer under him, making sure they understood that some of the most important ideas come from enlisted mechanics who solve problems on the spot, problems that engineers far away never see. McKenna stayed in the service until 1946, then moved back to California. In 1948, he opened a small garage in Long Beach and spent the next 42 years working on engines. He rarely talked about the war. If someone asked, he simply said he was a mechanic and fixed airplanes. In 1991, a military historian studying P-38 modifications came across notes about the piano wire tensioner in maintenance logs from New Guinea. He tracked down McKenna through veteran records. McKenna was 73 then, still working part-time in his garage. He confirmed the whole story but brushed it off, saying it wasn't anything special, just a fix that needed to be made. The historian later estimated that the modification probably saved somewhere between 80 and 100 American pilots based on survival improvements in the units that used it. McKenna said he never kept track. He just remembered the pilots who made it home: Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, and the others. That was enough for him. James McKenna passed away in 2006 at the age of 88. He was buried at Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned that he had served as an aircraft mechanic during World War II. It didn't mention the piano wire fix. It didn't mention that he had changed how the P-38 flew. It didn't mention that he broke rules to save lives. His old garage in Long Beach is still around, though someone else owns it now. In the back office, there's a faded photo hanging on the wall. A young mechanic in greasy coveralls standing beside a P-38 Lightning. The date on the back says August 1943, New Guinea. That's what real innovation in war looks like. It doesn't usually come from official committees or formal engineering departments. It comes from sergeants and mechanics who spot problems, think on their feet, and act without waiting for permission because lives depend on it. If this story moved you, consider giving the video a like. It helps us bring more forgotten pieces of World War II history to people who've never heard them. Subscribe if you want to stay connected with these untold stories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Our community stretches from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history lovers. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.